got up to Daf Chaf, and we're up to Ula Rab Shimon. So we're getting very close to the Mishnah, but we still have a few lines in the Gemara to finish it from yesterday in order to start the Mishnah. So the Gemara goes back now to explain Rabbi Shimon, and you'll see this. You'll see the word Shimon about, shall I say, 9 lines down from the top of the Amud. Will Rabbi Shimon the Amar Hoel Uba Umitza'a Beheter Below Amda Olav Shah Achas Beisa. So the case is that Reuven was married to Sarah, and he died. And then Shimon was Miyabim, Ashes Reuven, Sarah, and then Levi was born. So Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that when Shimon dies, Sarah, Ashes Reuven, who's now Ashes Shimon, will fall for Yibum to Levi, because as far as Ashes Reuven is concerned, which is Achiv Shalo, Ashes Achiv Shalo Bolama, that Zika to Reuven is gone. Once Shimon was Miyabim, Ashes Reuven, Sarah. And therefore there's only one Yibum to deal with, says Reb Shimon. But now the question that the Gemara is asking is, we just had a drasha, and we're going to have to ask a question, Elamei Ata, Achoso Me'imo, how far are we going to go with this logic? You see, Rabbi Shimon's logic is that when Levi is born into the world, he's facing a situation where Zikas Reuven is gone, it's been replaced by Shimon, by virtue of Shimon's Yibum. So now, Achoso Me'imo, Shenesa'a Achiv Me'aviv, V'achakach Nolad Ach Umeis. So let's just get this scenario. Let's say Sarah is a half sister to Shimon through a common mother. And that's one of the 15 arayos that are mentioned at the beginning of the Masechet. Well, Potros Pturos Minachalitza Minayib. Okay, so we're talking about Sarah, who's the sister of Shimon from his mother, and Shenisa'ah Reuven, Achiv Me'aviv. So Reuven and Shimon have the same father, they have different mothers. And Reuven now marries Shimon's sister. Now you may ask me, how could Reuven marry his brother's sister? The answer is simple, because his brother's sister is not related to him at all. Why? Because it's only his brother's sister through a common mother. So this woman is not related to him. Well, we call her Sarah. Now, Nolad Ach, 1 second. 1 second. Let me just see. He has a picture of it here. Rachel Yodelo Sarah. Change the names on me. So 1 second. And this is a very simple Gemara. I don't know why I'm having trouble. It's very, very simple. The Achakach Nolad Ach. One second. Now, sister. Okay, so Achiv Me'aviv marries Shimon's half sister. Achakach Nolad Ach.
This says it's Shimon.
Right, that's what's confusing. I thought it would be Levi. Usually when you have Nolad Ach, it's Levi, but here it's Shimon. So again, what happens? Shimon was Sarah was married to Reuven before Shimon was born. Okay, that's possible, right? So again, Sarah is married. So Reuven marries Sarah, who's a half sister to Shimon, but Shimon isn't even born yet. So then Shimon is born, and then Reuven dies. Right? Uba umitzah behet. I'm trying to avoid this diagram here because I think it is. If this is the right diagram here, he changes the names on me, which is going to just get confused. All right, you know what? We'll try it. Moshe Nosses Rachel, Yodelo es Sarah. Yaakov Nosa es Leah, Yodelo es Reuven. Okay. Nosa Reuven es Sarah. Mace Moshe, mission. Oh my God. Getting Is it a little simpler in your notes, maybe? Yeah, I usually. But does he have a scenario here just to make it? This is a very simple Gemara. I don't know why I'm getting. Oh no,
no.
Oh, here maybe he explains it. Is
yeah?
Yaakov marries Leah. Okay. Yeah, he's going through the same rigmarole. Yaakov marries Leah, who bore him Reuven, and then died. At the same time, Amram married Yocheved, Miriam, and Amram. The widower Yaakov married the widow.
Shimon has a maternal sister
who's married to
Reuven, his paternal brother.
Okay, that much I understood. But who was alive and who wasn't alive? I'm just trying to understand what's up ahead. Well, who dies and who falls for even to whom Reuven and who is born? Reuven, who's married. His
maternal brother dies.
Reuven, who's married to Shimon's maternal sister dies. Okay, and now Reuven's wife is not related to Shimon at all.
No, she's his maternal sister.
Oh, but Reuven's wife is Shimon's maternal sister. And that's the most cash, like that. It should be even though it's the maternal sister. So now what happens? Who is born there?
I don't think anybody.
It says achakach nolad ach. You don't have those words in your Gemara? Obviously, it has to be nolad ach because otherwise the Gemara has no question on Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon's shita is that since he was nolad and it was matzah beheter, just 1 second. Does he tell you who was born? Who now is born? Oh, Shimon is born. Oh, so in other words, when Reuven marries Shimon's sister, Shimon is not even alive yet.
Right.
Okay, now Shimon is born, and what is he looking at? What does he mean? Matzah beheter. Now, but Reuven dies now. So what? Since what? Since Reuven married Shimon's sister on the mother's side, right? And now Reuven dies. And what's the matzah beheter? I'm not exactly sure I understand that language of matzah beheter. Nolad Shimon, Kfar Hoisa Nesua LeRuven. Wait, just give me a minute. Already married, okay? Already married, okay? She's Shimon's sister. She's already married. Yeah. I mean, just in very loose, broad terms, without getting into the details, the Gemara is accusing Rabbi Shimon of holding that you can have a woman who's an erva to the Yavam, and yet there will be Yibum because the Ishus, which generates Yibum, was created before the birth of this person. So that whatever other erva relationships might have kicked in, we're just going to focus all our attention on the issues that's propelling Yibum, right? So let's take the original case of Reb Shimon. You have Shimon being the Yabim Eishes Ruvain, and Eishes Ruvain should be an erva on Levi because of Eishes of Shalobio, but we're going to replace that erva as far as Yibum is concerned with the fact that there's a new Ishus that begins a whole story. But that Ishus is mafkia, the original Zikas Yibum to Reuven. That's from Shimon. Okay, now let's see how that applies here. Shimon is now born, and Reuven, since he married this woman, that Ishus somehow removed the erva of Sarah, who's Shimon's maternal sister, to Shimon. Let me just see the Gemara's answer, because I might be so stuck in the Gemara's answer that I can't understand the Gemara's kasha. Gemara says, Isra achoso lehechan ozi. All right, I think that's more or less what we were asking. What do you mean, bo matzah behet? If you're talking about Eishes Ach, so that's where the Torah's matir Eishes Ach in the case of Yibum. Now the question is she Eishes Ach of Reuven or is she Eishes Ach of Shimon? If she's Eishes Ach of Reuven, then we have a problem with Yibum as far as Levi is concerned because of the erva. But if she's Eishes Ach of Shimon, so we have a brand new ballgame. That's Rabbi Shimon. But just because Reuven marries Shimon's sister, therefore we're going to say that Yibum. Again, let's see if the Gemara makes any sense. Hachanami. Oh yeah. So wait a minute. If you're telling me that once an erva, always an erva, then how are you going to explain Reb Shimon? In the case of Eishes Achim Shalai Below and Levi is Isra Achim Shalai Below Lechan Hazil. So my answer is Ha Isur the Lesle Atera. Hi Isur Lesle Atera, but Hi Isur Isle Atera. Before we read the Masifta's comment over here, let's just try our hand at it ourselves. In the case of Eishes Ach, we have to determine whether or not Sarah is Eishes Achim of Reuven, and that's a problem for Levi, or she's Eishes Ach of Shimon. And the answer is that Eishes Ach itself is what propels Yibum. And the whole matter of Yibum is on the Isser Erev of Eishes Ach. So now we're saying that what propels Yibum here is the Eishes Ach of Shimon. But the Gemara had a Havamin on that. Now I'm beginning to see what the Gemara's Havamin was. Because she was an Eishes Ach of Reuven. But the answer is that when Shimon was born, when Levi was born, he came into a situation where she's Eishes Ach of Shimon. Now, in that case of Achosa Me'ov, Achosa Me'imo, when Shimon is born, let's say Reuven, does it make any difference if Reuven died before Shimon? No. It can't be that Reuven died before Shimon was born because then it's Eishes Ach Shalai Below. No, so it has to be that Shimon is born, and Reuven's wife is Shimon's sister. So what was the Havamina? Just trying to just give a minute here. So what was the Havamina that now with Reuven's death she should fall for Yibum? That we're going to be Matir Achos. Why would be Matir Achos? Because somehow Shimon's marriage is how does Shimon's marriage obliterate the erva of Achoso Mi'ima? Mitch, you have it? You're as confused as I am. I was going to skip this Gemara, honestly, because I wanted to start the Mishnah today. But, I'm honest about it. We didn't get a chance to finish yesterday, but I didn't realize that how complicated this Gemara is. We're up to the Mishnah now, am I right?
In the simplest sense, they were saying that in a different scenario, Reuben's wife would fall to Yibum. Why wouldn't this wife fall?
Well, what are we talking about? We're talking about Reb Shimon's case with Levi, or we're talking about this case of Achos? Yeah, go ahead, say it again.
So I'm just saying, it would look as if, there's, when Reuben dies, his wife falls to Yibum to his fact that she's his maternal sister. Yeah, is the complication, but they're saying because he has a wife and wives fall to Yibum if he dies childless, why wouldn't she fall?
Well, no, Steve, that question you could ask in general, but the Torah says that in an Erev there's no Yibum. You have to somehow pin it on Reb Shimon, the case of Levi. You understand the Gemara? Right. The Gemara's not asking a radical question here. I don't understand the 15 cases of Arayas because after all, the Torah gave you Yibum. Who cares about the Erev? The Gemara is not bothered. The Gemara is bothered because Reb Shimon somehow took an erva of Achos of Eishes Achiv in the case of Levi with Ruv Eishes, and then he replaced it with Yibum. But again, he replaced it with Yibum only not because of the mitzvah of Yibum per se, but because of Shimon's wife to Eishes Reuben.
Right. So he's saying if he could remove that Eishes Reuben, why can't he remove Achos Imo
to Shimon? Achoso to Shimon. Again, when I say Achoso, I mean Achosimo. I'm not going to just repeat over and over again Achoso. So you have an Erel Achoso, and what? And so what? So Reuben marries Shimon's sister. So why should that change the law of Erev? I don't get it. So Shimon said,
he removed.
You see, when you're dealing with Zika, you want to know which Zika generates Yibum. You have two options here. You have Reuben's Zika and you have Shimon's Zika. So the Chachamim say Reuben's Zika is still alive and well and is activated. And Shimon says, "Name that Zika was Mufka, was replaced, and there's nothing to talk about. There's only Zika Shimon." You could understand that, but now you're going to tell me that we're going to undermine the entire parsha of Arayos?
No. But that's what they're saying is if that's his position, then his position should be the same in this case.
Why? No, but I'm asking why. Again, I think it's a valid question to ask when you have two brothers that were married in sequence to the same woman, and both brothers in sequence die. You follow what I'm saying? Then you want to know when it comes to the third brother, where does he even plug in here? Does it plug in from the first marriage, from the second marriage? So Reb Shimon says something which I think is intuitively correct. It should be plugged in and propelled by the second marriage, not by the first marriage. You want to know whether or not this woman called Sarah is Kuka Machmas Reuben or Machmas Shimon. And here we don't say Kol HaKodim Sochma. Here we say I got you. The last one is the winner. Shimon married this girl Sarah, and now he dies, and she falls even from Shimon. There was a Zika to Reuben. Okay, Shimon took care of that Zika to Reuben. He was Miyav. But I don't understand here. Here you talk about an Erev. So there's an Erev that falls for Yibum. So why is Reb Shimon guilty here of saying something that would allow you to overlook that Erev? Again, you could always say to me, Rabbi Berzo, that's exactly Gemara's problem. But it took the Gemara a long time to cough this up. What was the Gemara thinking of me? I don't. In Yiddish we have a tzushtel. What's a tzushtel? I don't understand the comparison.
Because they're different Arabs. It's not just the.
Yeah, no, I'm saying why doesn't the Gemara? Is the Gemara just looking another? In other words, why did the Gemara just say every single erva? Right? So I marry my brother's mother-in-law, let's say. Right? So you're going to tell me, well, once I marry my brother's mother-in-law, then when she falls for you to my brother, well, I married him. So, I mean, take the first Mishnah and just rip it out. But the Gemara comes up with a more, maybe the Gemara is just being sophisticated and comes up with a nice clean-cut case of two brothers, one of which is married to the heir of the other brother. Here that I'm missing. I know, the Masechet sort of disappoints me. I don't know, maybe there's something in the article, I don't know. But even with Gamesh Yochel he has something in a footnote. I don't know if it's relevant to us. Shem Shayibu Mafkias Ach Yochel Lachziro Achar Irsha. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Oh, yeah, actually. Well, I don't think that's relevant. She's married to my brother. No, I don't care. I had this crazy idea that crossed my mind, but it doesn't work out. I was going to make an equation between Ashes Achiv and Achos, Ashes like Achos, but how would I don't even know how to take a first step. If you follow what I was trying to do, that if Ashes Achiv is like Achoso, if you could somehow construct such a thing, then the Torah says that Ashes Ach is Muteres B'Makom Yovam, and therefore Achoso should also be Muteres B'Makom Yovam. And that's why the Gemara is focused specifically on Achoso. I don't begin to see any equation, any comparison. Ashes Ach means I'm prohibited in the relatives. I'm not prohibited. I can marry any of the relatives of my brother if they're not my relatives. Like, for example, his sister I can marry. Right? But I cannot marry his wife. She's like a host. I don't know. You follow me where I'd like to go, but I don't know how to get there. The light at the end of the tunnel is if I can somehow make a comparison between Achoso and Ashes Ach. There's some commonality between those two arayos. And therefore, if the Torah was Mater Ashes Achi, then when my brother marries my sister, that already creates a whole new Ashes Achi kind of relationship, which would be Mater Achoso when his wife falls for you. I don't know, begin to see. Okay, so now at this point, I have to apologize that I don't have the next volume. I made a mistake. So if there's, maybe I could, if I would take your art scroll Gemara, let's say. You have another Gemara?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll do it that way. Okay, Klal Omru B'Yavam, right? So we're on the Mishnah now, on Daf Chof Amid Aleph, about 15 lines down from the top. Kol Shehi Isur Erva, Lo Choletzes V'Lo Misyabemis. But this is more or less a recap of the first Mishnah in Masechet Yevamot, but with the addition of the word klal. The Gemara is going to focus our attention on the word klal, because the word klal in any Mishnah is a ribui. So the Gemara is going to try to figure out what that ribui is for. Iser mitzvah ve'iser kedusha choletzes v'lo mitziabemis. We have a category of a woman who falls for yibum for chalitza, but not for yibum itself. And the Mishnah now is going to try to explain what are these two categories. Basically, iser mitzvah is what's called a mitzvah midivrei sofer. And that's arayos. That's called shnios l'arayos. So the Rabbanan gave us a whole list of ladies that we're not allowed to marry, even though Midaraisa we're allowed to marry them. And if such an erva, which is only an erva d'Rabbanan, midivrei sofrim, falls for yibum, then on the one hand, it's not a full-fledged erva, and therefore you cannot exclude her from zikas yibum. But on the other hand, we're not going to allow him to be miyabed and override the Isa D'Rabbanan of Shnios Laras. That's called Mishum Mitzvah. And the Gemara is going to try to explain why it's called mitzvah. What does the word mitzvah mean? Mitzvah midirei sofa. Then we have something called an Iser Kedusha. The word Kedusha in this context is a reference to kahuna. Because besides the general mitzvah of Kedoshim Tiyu that applies to every member of Klal Yisrael, there's a special command for the Kohanim to be Kedoshim, on a high level of sanctity, and that generates an Iser, for example, of a Kohen Hedjot marry a Grusha or a Chalutza, and in the case of a Kohen Gadol, he's enjoined for marrying even an Almon. So any of those Isurim will knock off Yibum, even though it's only Chayve Lav, and that's why we're going to need Chalitza. And this seems to be a Doraisa halach. Now, in the first case of Shnius Larayos, we said that she cannot fall for Yibum. There's no possibility of Yibum. That seems to be a D'Rabbanan halach. Because why are we blocking Yibum if not for the fact that the D'Rabbanan made this Geser of Shnius? But in the case of Chayve Lavin, which is called Mishur Iser Kedusha, and we're going to see that Iser Kedusha could apply even in case of a Mamzeres or a Nesina. That already blocks Yibum on a Doraisa level because the mitzvah of Yibum is not powerful enough to override a lot. Now, the Gemara is going to, I'm just preview, the Gemara is going to attack this from the perspective of Esei Docha Losas. Now, in the case of an Almona to a Kohen Gadol, that's not only a law of Almana Lo Yikach, but it's also an essay, because the Torah says, V'hu Isha Bibsuleha Yikach. And now we go back to the drawing board and we say, Essay Docha Losas, but ain't Essay Docha Losavies. But since she's not an Erva, there is a Zikas Yibum, and that's called Choletzes V'lo Misyavemes. Achosa shehi yevimta choletzes o misyavemes. What's this case? Okay, I'll read to you the English translation. He says, two brothers die childless, and each of their widows awaits Yibum Achalitza from the third brother. The two widows are, okay, here, I can't read the English here because it's just going to confuse me. It's called Achos Zikukasa. Because since both sisters fall for Yibum to the third brother, when both brothers die, then each one is Achos Zikukasa. And the Mishnah speaks of a case where the fellow Yevamos were sisters. One of them, so one of them is an Arab. So in other words, let's say the two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. We'll get to Levi in just a second. So Reuven and Shimon married Rachel and Leah, but the status of Rachel, let's say I'm just choosing Rachel, it could have been Leah, but one of them is also an erva to Levi. So let's say it would be Levi's mother-in-law or Levi's half-sister that we spoke about before, or Levi's niece, or whatever it might be. So now, when these two ladies fall for Yibum, normally, if it wasn't that one of them was an erva to Levi, we would say that they're both excluded from Yibum and Chalitza because of Achos Kukasa. So when Rachel and Leah fall for Levi, each one is Achos Kukasa. And therefore, there's no Yibum and Chalitza. But paradoxically, because one of these two ladies is also an erva to Levi, meaning when Reuven or Shimon married Rachel or Leah, it doesn't matter again, any combination, he married an erva of Levi. So therefore, one of those two sisters, the one that's an erva, doesn't even fall for Yibum. And there's no Zika. And if there's no Zika, there's no Achos Kukas. It's a really interesting paradox, because what happens is, because one of these two Yevamot, right, Yevamot, meaning one of the two wives of one of the two brothers, is an erva to Levi, then after because of that, Levi could be Mekayim the mitzvah of Yibum with the other sister, which normally he wouldn't be able to do because of Achos Kukos. Isur mitzvah, what's Isur mitzvah? Shnios midivrei sofrim, Isur kedusha, grusha v'chalutza lekohen hejot. By the way, the word chalutza is agav urcha, because chalutza is only also to kohen midrabbanan, not midoraisa. And mamzeres u'nesina l'Yisrael, ubas Yisrael l'nosin ula mamzer. Just a second. So he doesn't mention almana l'kohen gadol, does he? Oh, I skipped it. Sorry, I skipped it. Almana l'kohen gadol. That's the most important one on the list, and I skipped it. Why is that the most important one on the list? The reason for that is because almana l'kohen gadol would be an essay and a losas, as I mentioned earlier. And grusha l'kohen hejot is only a lotas. So in a sense, the Mishnah could be read as lozu afzu, not only in the case of almana l'kohen gadol, where Yibum becomes an impossibility because ein essay dochalosa v'essay, even in the case of a pure losas, and the Mishnah gives examples. For example, grusha l'kohen hejot, mamzeres, or nesina l'Yisrael, or the other way around, bas Yisrael l'nos mamzer. In all those cases, we should have applied the principle of essay docha losas, because it's only a losas. And yet the Mishnah says, oh, let's say for lo misyabemis, there's no possibility of yibum. So the Gemara is going to have to darshan a pasuk to prove that the normal standard principle of essay docha losas does not apply in the case of yibum. But on the other hand, another drasha to teach me that she needs chalitza, and she's in that twilight zone with a zika, but no possibility of yibum. That's in Chai Vilam. In the case of almana l'kohen gadol, I don't even need those psukim, because almana l'kohen gadol is an essay analysis, and therefore ein essay dochalos avias. Now, is almana l'kohen gadol an essay? So I said to you, it is because who each of the psuleo yikach. That's in Parshas Zemor. Did I get that right? Yeah. Oh, so here it gets complicated, because not every almana comes under that essay. There are two types of almanas. There's what's called an almana min ha'nesuin and almana min ha'erusin. And the difference would be if let's say a Kohen Gadol married an almana min ha'nesuin, then he violates not only a lav but also an essay, because she's not a besula. But if on the other hand he marries an almana min ha'erusin, which means that after erusin, before they consummated marriage, her husband died or divorced. Well, can't be divorced though, because then she'd be a grusha. But he died. Then her status vis-a-vis Kohen Gadol is that of an almana under the lava who almana lo yikach, but there's no essay of besula yikach because she is a besula. That's called an almana min erusin. And I'm going to assume now that our Mishnah, if it's lozu afsu, is talking about almana min ha'nesuin, and therefore ein essay dochalos aviyas. Okay. Now, there's a long discussion about a nesina as to whether or not a nesina is an Isur Doraisa or an Isur Dirabana. And for that, you have to know Tanakh. I don't know if he has any notes on this. Let's just see. It should be note 19 if it's at all. Oh, here it is. The Nesinim were descendants of Hivite. What's Hivite? Chiti, maybe? Chitim? Chivi, Yevusi, Chivi. Chivi is one of the 7 nations, right? Okay. Oh, Chivi in English, I never knew this is called a Hivite. Now, they inhabited the city of Givon in Eretz Yisrael at the time of Kibush Yoshua. And they did a whole scheme to fool Yoshua that they were not Chivites, that they were not members of the 7 nations. They wanted to spare their lives because we were given a mitzvah of Lo Sechaya called the Shem. So what did they do? They dressed up as if they were coming from a long road somewhere else. And they somehow they were accepted for conversion. They fooled Yoshua and they were converted. But we're not sure about the status of their conversion. Anyway, when Yoshua finds out that he was duped, so he makes him into Chote Eitzim B'Chavei Mayim, and he makes a gzera that we can't marry them even though they convert, meaning he, so to speak, rejects their gerus. The title Nesinim derives from the verse Vayitnem Yoshua, right? He appointed them as Chot V'Eitzim, fine. The Nesinim were forbidden to marry into the Jewish community. And Rashi holds in the Masechet Sugas on Daf Chav Tes, that's Naira, Perik Naira Murasa, we learned this together, John. Remember this? That Rashi sheet is that's only an Isur D'Rabbanan. Tos's sheet in Elu Nairas is that's Doraisa, which I think means that Tosas is assuming the gerus was not valid. But then the big question: so why did Yoshua bother with putting a whammy on the Xera that we can't marry their offspring if there was never a gerus that was valid? That's the subject of a Tosas about this big at the beginning of Elu Nairas. Now, although it is illegal to marry a mamzeres or a nesina, if one marries something, the Kedusha takes it. For the Mishnah, it speaks of a case where he illegally married such a woman. So it means Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Reuven marries a mamzeres, which the Torah recognizes that Kedusha, even though it's illegal, and he violates the law of mamzeres. And now Reuven dies. Not necessarily because he married the mamzeres. I mean, maybe that's why he died. I don't know. Anyway, so the halacha is now that when he dies, this mamzeres falls to Yibum to his brother Shimon. Although he may not take her in Yibum, she requires chalitza. And he tells you in the preceding notes. She cannot be released without chalitza because the presence of a mere negative commandment is insufficient to exclude her from the requirement of chalitza. In other words, we need an erva to remove the zikas yibum. A lav will prevent what we call a modern Hebrew bitzua, meaning implementing yibum, but nevertheless there is a zika, and therefore she needs chalitza. So that's the status of chavi lav, and the Gemara is going to derive this from Sukkot. So the Gemara asks, klal asuye mai. Right, the Mishnah mentions that with regard to an erva, is kolshi iser erva lochol letzes below misyam. So why did the Mishnah add klal? What's the reboot? Omra from Bar Papa, lasuye tsaras island is okay. Now we have a complicated business here, right? An islandess is excluded from yibum under the pasuk kasher telik. What's it say there? Right? Mitch, I need your help over here. Unless you have a hook here. Right? What's it say? it says Yivama Yavo Aleha, right? Chafei, I believe, right? And then it says Violdalo or something like that. So an islandess who's a girl that doesn't produce Simone Gadlus, and she's already 20 years old, so she doesn't fall for Yibum. And the reason is because the Torah in the Parsha of Yibum excluded her. Now, what happens next? Let's take the next step. If she's not in the Parsha of Yibum, then she's Achos, she's Eishes Ochim, right? Any woman who was married to so-and-so's brother, and then there was no Yibum, is by definition Eishes Ochim, Shalom Makom Mitzvah. And therefore, if Reuven was married to this woman who's an islandess, plus he's married to another woman, that second wife becomes a tsaras ereva because the islandess herself is an ereva. And that's what the Mishnah wants to establish. Lasuye tsaras islands. So this is going to be a gigantic machlokas here about what's the status of an islandess. Is she an ereva veishas ach, and therefore she patters up her tzara, or not? Or did you find Steve the pasuk by any chance? Yeshru achin yachtov. What comes next? Excellent. What's after the Eleh? Okay, next. That's the end?
So there's
Isn't there a part there about Korah Shem Liachiv? No?
right. So that's
I don't know. That I can't tell you.
Mimo Yakotze Ish Kakad at Yibito, Yom Sa Yibito,
Ashara,
Ashara, El Yom Ramein, Yom
Oh,
Israel, Loab.
okay. So Lahakim Shem Liachiv Yisrael. So okay, we have to go through that article about Lahakim Shem, whose name, but. So, in other words, we're talking about a woman who could have children. An islandess can't have children; it's excluded from the parsha. And now we have a machlokes in the Gemara. What her status is? Does she go back to the status of Eishes Ach or no? There's no Yibum, but she's not an erev of Eishes Ach, and then after he's going to be the Tsar. And the Gemara says, Kid Rav Asi. Rav Asi is the one who holds that Tsaras island is Eino Choletzes V'Eino Misyabemes. Because she is a tsaras ereva, because an islandess is an ereva. He says here, Rav Asi derives from scripture that the islandess is excluded from Yibum, okay, because she's not included on Lahakim, etc. Therefore, she's considered an ereva to the Yavam, right? That's called Eishes Achi. A co-wife is therefore the tsar of an ereva. So that's what the word klal is coming to. But I don't know, he doesn't bring down the other shita here. See, here's where I need the assist. I have it 5 minutes. If I could. Do you have any sort of note there about Gemara on Daf Yud Beis, I think. Daf Yud Beis, more quote of our Pluta, Rav Asi. Where is it? Oh, Omer of Asi, Tzoras Island is Asura. Shenemer v'hoya b'chora shet leid prat la'ayvin she'eni yoledis. Island is she'ena yoledis. Oh, I'll tell you what it is. The Bar Plukta of Asi would hold that since she's an islandess, she's never ever in the parish of Yibum. So there's never a Zika, and therefore there's no Tsaras Erva. No one's arguing that islandess is an Erva Beishas Achid. The question is there a Zikas Yibum and an Afil Yibum? Because to pater up the Tzara, you need that both of them fell for Yibum. The islandess never fell for Yibum. Rav Asi's radical Chiddush is that no, an islandess does fall for Yibum. There won't be any mitzvah of Yibum. She remains there for Neshus Ach, but since she had an Afila for Yibum, therefore her tzara is Eder Misyabem, she becomes a tzaras error. Again, the fact that in theory, her tzara would be a tzaras error, that's, I don't need Ravasi for that. But if not for Ravasi, I would say that the tzara is not a tzaras error, because an islandess is out of the parsha of Yibum, and therefore there's never an afila for Yibum, and a tzara requires an afila for Yibum. On the contrary, the ball is in the court of Ravasi. The burden of proof is on his shoulders to explain why there's a tour of Tzaras Erba. But that's what he derives from the word klal in our Mishnah. Ika di Amri. The Ika di Amri has the exact opposite conclusion. Kol she'isura isur erva hu di asira tzarasa. Lo isura isur erva tzarasa lo asira lemute mai amra papa lemute tzaras islandis udaloker of us. This is a little bit different than what I was saying. So I was saying she had no nefila. He's saying that in isura isur erva. Why not? Let's see if he adds anything here. Oh, I see. Okay, so he in the footnote, he refers you to a ritva. The ritva, this is really lumdish. The ritva wants to divide arayos in terms of Yibum into two fundamentally different categories. There's an erva who's really an erva, and then there's an erva who's not an erva, but just she doesn't fall for Yibum for a technical reason, and then Mela she becomes an erva. So it's not an erva machmas atzma, machmas gufa, but machmas I nefila lemitzvahs Yibum. And that's the issue of an islandess. Islandess is not an erva. I mean, the only din that applies to an islandess is that she doesn't fall for Yibum. Other than that, I mean, her laws in marriage and in Ishus are identical with any other woman. Masha Enkein and Erva, she has the status of an Erva vis-a-vis any number of people who might be related to her, or maybe she's an Eishes Ish, or maybe she's Chayve Lavim, or Mamzeres, and so forth and so on. That's not the case of an island. And the status of an island is, as an erva, is a result of the parsha of Yibum, but it's not inherent in her status. I'm sure there's deeper and deeper layers to this, but that's what we have. So therefore, when it says klal, now we have a whole new perspective on the word klal in the Mishnah. Klal omer b'yivam lo choletzes v'lo misyabemes. And what? And as a result, it generates an exclusion on the tzara. That's only kol she'isura isur erva, and now we can add two words, machmas atzma. She herself is either married to someone else, or she's she'er basar. So in such a case of isur erva machmas atzma, she patters up the tzara. And again, we learned the tzara from Achos Ishta. Okay? So Achos Ishta is an erva beguf. So it's so fascinating that the word klal here has a ribui. No, actually, let's see. In the first case, klal is a ribui. That's going to Rav Asi. Ika di amri livaute. Interesting. That the thrust of this klal is actually a mute, meaning according to Rav Asi's interpretation, the klal means that any Iser Erva patas up Hatzara, including the Erva of an island. And according to the Ika Diamri, on the contrary, the klal is telling you that in the case of the Iser Erva of an islandess, insofar as she's dissimilar to the classic Iser Erva, she does not pater up Hatzara. And that's Rafram. Okay. Now the Mishnah says, Achosa shehi yevimta. Achosa deman. Ilem di Iser mitzvah. If you're talking about an Iser mitzvah, which I guess is Midirei Sofrim, Midirei Ramya Kameh, Paga Bachos Kos. The Mishnah says that Achosa is Misyabemis. I'm sorry, Achosa Shehi Yevimta is, that says, Misyabemis. If it's our sister, Midirei Sofrim, how could it possibly be Yibur? So in other words, on a Doraisa level, she's not an Erva. She's only an Erva Midivrei Sof. What does it mean? Poga b'chos kuso? So it means Ruvain is married to two wives, one of whom who is an Erva Doraisa. Sorry. But Ruvain is married to Rachel, and Shimon is married to Leah. So that means that Reuven and Shimon married two sisters. That doesn't make any sense. If we're going to say the Isser mitzvah, so the Mishnah says, "Oletes o mitziabemes." Or says the what? Even the midaraisa ramya kamei is pagabachos also. Two women fall for Yibum to Shimon, right? One of them is an Erva Derabbanan, Shneos Larayos. So what's Achos here? What's the exact case here? Checking.
One of the
What is it? Two sisters that fell in front of the third brother? So that's achos. Now, where's the Issa D'Rabbanan here? One of my. There's nothing here in Rashi, is there? Achosa, what does the Mishnah say? Achosa shehi yivimta, letzes omis yabemus. Letzes omis yabemus. This is Masechet Yevamot. One of them is in Arabic. Fine. Therefore, one who's in Erva doesn't fall for Yibum. Therefore, a sister will fall for Yibum. That's the final maskana, right? Let's just read the final maskana. Elachosa de Iser Erva. Okay. Now, what was the Hava meaning? Ilema, the Iser Mitzvah, which means Shniyas Rayos. These two sisters. Oh, I got it. Oh, fine. Fine. Asimon Yaran. It takes a while. So if you have two sisters that fall for Yibum to Levi, the third brother, so then if one of those two sisters is an erva to Levi, then the other sister is Misyabemis. Okay. But the Gemara argues if that erva relationship to Levi is only the Rabbanon, but she's Shniel's ayos. Let's say his brother was married to his granddaughter, who's Shniel's ayos. So then, on a Doraisa level, Shniel's ayos is a Zikas Yibum because the Torah doesn't recognize that as an Erev at all. The Mela, her sister becomes a Chos Kukaso. So how can the Mishnah say Misyabemes? You have that? Everybody got that? I don't know. I didn't hear a good response. Ella says the Gemara, and this will conclude, is Achosa de Isur Erva. Okay, then, so the two sisters, one of which is a full-fledged Erva to Levi, an Erva Doraisa. Okay, so mitzvah, shniel, it's fine. Later on, we're going to get into a list of Shniyas Larayos. No, we're not ready for that yet. And there are both sides, so let me give this back to you. I'll bring you mine. Okay, and you have photocopies? Were you able to enlarge it?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
So,
That's great.